welcome to the chapter house of St. Paul's Cathedral. It's a great pleasure to be able to welcome you here this evening for what I think will be a hugely stimulating and enjoyable presentation and conversation. My name is Paula Buddha. I'm Canon Chancellor here at St. Paul's, and I'm the director of the St. Paul's Cathedral Institute. In the Institute, what we're trying to do is reflect on contemporary issues that are particularly important within our society today. And this conversation about how we make sustainable communities for the future feels to contribute very well to that aim within the Institute. But now, let me just say that this, as I've said already, is a very significant event for us, and it is marking a partnership between us here at the St. Paul's Cathedral Institute, the Church Urban Fund, and the William Temple Foundation. And we are delighted to have that partnership tonight. Introducing the Church Urban Fund, let me now introduce you to Rob Wickham.
And friends, can I add my welcome to that of Paula's for what I hope will be an extraordinarily good evening this evening with some stimulating conversation. Now, throughout my ministry, I'd been involved in ministry for over 30 years now, and I served two particular parishes for quite some time. The first parish you would have probably travelled through if you've ever been to Euston, St Pancras or King's Cross stations. The parish of Somerstown. It's the area of the country which has got the largest concentration of social housing in the country. And in it, a real vision in the 1920s was that of Basil Jellicoe, Father Basil Jellicoe, who orchestrated a whole process of slum clearance. Slum clearance which was very much focused on creating community where people could thrive, where people could live well. Even down to the fact that as you walk through the estate now, you'll see beautifully decorated finials depicting something of the saints. It was a regeneration program which focused on enabling people to live well. I then moved to Hackney, where I was the vicar for nearly 10 years. And that was a place of extreme levels of house building as house prices rose. We were part of the story. We, as a church, just on the side of the churchyard, created 58 new homes. And on top of that, 32 new almshouse units. And again, the focus of those nearly 100 new homes was about creating places where people could thrive, a real sense of livability. Because we felt right at the heart that there was a difference between gentrification, which is transactional-led, finance-led, and regeneration, which of course is rooted in the principles of baptism theology. Baptism theology being about new life, being about relationships, and being about people. Tonight, my friends, is going to be a very stimulating conversation. We gathered together on the 40th anniversary of the publication of the extraordinary work, Faith in the City, where the Church of England did 2 to 3 years worth of research about urban priority areas, that what makes different areas tick, or makes people tick, and how do you respond in that time to the very quick increasing levels of poverty in the late 80s and early 90s. It spoke about housing, it spoke about health, it spoke about education, all sorts of other things. And it speaks too about the theology of human flourishing. And the Church Urban Fund exists to support parishes, to support churches and wider community groups and those of other faiths, to respond today relationally to poverty. And what can we do in terms of creating a world as God intends it to be? And right at the heart of that work is about housing and creating communities. So my hope and my prayer is that this stimulating night tonight, in this extraordinary collaboration of a number of different organizations, will enable us to dream dreams about enabling people to thrive, livability, rooted in baptism theology, about new life and about relationships. Friends, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Rob. I know that we will all be here for personal reasons as well as professional reasons. And Rob talked about his personal reasons where he's passionate about this subject. I feel the need just to chip in my own personal reason for my passion for this subject. I grew up in a place in Manchester, which was called Brunswick. I was born in 1969, really how old I am. And when I was born, the house that we lived in was the only house left in the area because they'd done slum clearance. And once by the time I left home at the age of 18, there was a completely new area built. And it's just right. If you don't know Manchester, Brunswick is next to Hugh and Moss side, it kind of comes alongside. And so this report came out when I was 16, when I was slowly just developing my theology. And if there was one book that made me want to be a theologian, it was this one. So that's why I was really passionate when Rob and I started the conversation about this evening. Now let me introduce to you our first panel member. I'm going to do them as they speak, so that you can hear their CVs just before they speak. Our first speaker this evening is Professor Chris Baker. Chris is the Director of Research for the William Temple Foundation and Professor of Religion, Belief and Public Life at Goldsmiths University, very close to here. His publications and research explore the shifting role of religion and belief within a rapidly changing society and across social, cultural, political, urban and theological agendas. Chris, we look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, Fagel. Hello, thank you very much. Sorry, I was a bit close, wasn't it? I hope you can all see me sitting there. It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for the kind invitation and the partnership with CUF and St. Paul's. A very quick word about William Temple Foundation. We're a public theology think tank set up in memory of Archbishop William Temple, who coined the phrase the welfare state and was the architect, really, along with Beveridge, of the post-war welfare state. So we've developed his passion for engaging theology and thinking, public thinking, with what's going on in the world. And at the table at the back, there's some of our more recent publications, which I think give you a sense of breadth of the things that we discuss, including a lot of stuff around urban mission and the future of it. The other hat I'm wearing tonight as well is as co-author of this report that just came out called Housing with Values, commissioned by something called the Faith and Belief Policy Collective. I, along with Phil Champagne, is in the audience tonight, one of the co-founders of that. And I'm delighted to say as well that the co-author of this report, Dr. Ayeni Hine, is in the audience as well. So if there's any questions I can't answer, I'm going to pass them over to you. Ayeni, I hope that's all right. Okay, so I've got about 12 minutes to explain why I think faith should be interested in planning and in housing, and particularly housing for the future. As I said, I'm going to base quite a lot of what I've been saying in this report. And the report that this is based upon was really just a conversation with a dozen or so experts in the field, planners, architects, community activists, as well as institutional faith representatives and representatives of no faith. It was really just again a series of questions going about what is the role of faith and belief in planning new towns. So there's going to be 5 elements to this. Newtown Blues, Imago Dei, or made in the image of God, the religious roots of planning, 4 principles of faith-derived planning, and partnership. So I've got about 2 minutes on each of those. Here we go. Newtown Blues. Religion in new towns was, I think, a very nerdy topic for any PhD, but that's what I did in the early 2000s. But it started, like all good research, or so I'm told, from a critical incident. And that critical incident was moving to Milton Keynes with a very young family in the early 90s. I was stunned at how mentally and spiritually debilitating I found the environment of the new town had on me. I hadn't realized, being incredibly naive, being, white, male and middle class, that this idea that a built environment could affect one's well-being so much was possible. We lived in a modern vicarage in a cul-de-sac with large drives and a constant need to use a car to get anywhere. so we never met our neighbours. At the heart of Milton Keynes at the time was a massive shopping centre, which closed early in the evening, and that was it. That was your entertainment. By the way, I briefly love Milton Keynes, just in case you're thinking of being unfair. It was flat, full of grids and roundabouts. Housing was screened behind vegetarian, and there was vegetation, not vegetarian, sorry. And there was little trace of what had existed in the landscape before, except every now and again you had this rather schizophrenic experience of encountering a medieval fish pond in the middle of a local neighborhood center with its identikit pug and shops. I see people nodding, so I'm guessing some of you probably experienced this landscape for yourself. So no ritual space, no sense of history. I felt uprooted, but unable to put down roots. And there was nothing with which I could form an attachment to place. So I decided to do a PhD to work out my sense of angst and alienation. And in doing so, discovered that I was probably experiencing a syndrome of chronic anxiety, loneliness, and alienation, often accompanied by financial debt, called Newtown Blues. So there is this syndrome associated with living in Newtowns called Newtown Blues. So this is my starting point in the journey that leads to today. Second point, heading, Imago Dei. Why should churches and other faith communities be interested in housing and new towns? Well, in a very general sense, I go back to Archbishop William Temple, after whom our foundation is named, and his justification for the post-war welfare state. He coined the phrase welfare state some years earlier, and in his small book entitled Christianity and Social Order, he makes the moral and ethical case for his vision of a comprehensive and universal welfare state, before laying out some very broad areas of policy as to what this new welfare state would look like. His core argument was that if every person is made in the image of God, Imago Dei, and has that innate dignity and potential in them as a result, how then do we create policy and planning that supports this idea of the innate human dignity of every person made in the image of God? He assumed in a secular age that if churches saw policies that created a social order that defaced or denied the image of God in every person, then the church, in his words, should interfere in the policy discourse and point out not only where the deficiencies and abuse of power are at work, but also in a positive spirit, come with some practical and workable ideas and solutions. And it's a happy coincidence that this evening hit the first broad area of policy he identified from at the end of Christianity and Social Order is housing. He writes, every child should find itself a member of a family housed with decency and dignity, so that they may grow up as a member of that basic community in a happy fellowship, unspoilt by underfeeding and overcrowding, by dirty and drab surroundings, or by mechanical monotony of environment. The context for this discussion today is that the UK faces a chronic and acute housing crisis. More than 1.3 million households are on social housing waiting lists, and over 160,000 children live in temporary accommodation. The current government's pledge to start delivering 1.5 million homes before the end of this parliament is ambitious and includes the designation of 12 new towns. Woo! You can imagine my ears pricked up on that. As Temple has outlined, we know how intimately linked poor housing is to poor health, poor education, poor social mobility, and crime. How much money will we save and how many lives will we save and turn around if we get this generation in new towns right? My third point, I'm calling it the genealogy of faith and planning. If you don't like the word genealogy, roots will do. So the roots between faith and planning go back a long way. Here I refer to pioneering faith-inspired settlements such as Bourneville, near Birmingham, Saltaire, near Leeds, Port Sunlight, on the Wirral, New Earswick. Does anyone know where New Earswick is? York, built by the Rowntree family, and New Lanark in Scotland. These experiments in model communities inspired the building of Letchworth Garden City and Welwyn Garden City, planned by Ebenezer Howard and designed by Barry Parker and Raymond Unwin. Built in the early 1900s, Howard's garden cities in turn paved the way for the 32 post-war new towns, which are currently home to 2.8 million people in this country. So the genealogy of the new new towns that are being proposed, you can trace directly back to the Quaker and non-conformist voices of the late 19th century, and their vision for balanced communities that provided not only housing of the highest quality and technical innovation that survives well to this day, but continuing education, opportunities for a rich communal life, access to beautiful countryside, parks, clean air, and secure and well-paid employment. This rich legacy alone, historical legacy, is, I believe, key to our claim as faith communities to be at the housing policy table. Fourth, the four faith-derived principles of planning that emerge from our research, and which we hope may introduce some new vocabulary or a new lexicon into the planning world. They're slightly edgy. So first of these four principles, post-secular planning. Has anyone come across the term post-secular? You're not going to admit it. A few have. Few cautious hands went up. Post-secular is a term coined by the great social theorist Jürgen Habermas, who recognized towards the end of the last century that secularization theory that excluded the wisdom, lived experience, and innovation that religion brings to the public square was empirically unjustified, intellectually unwarranted, and ethically indefensible. And the reason why people stood up and listened to what he said was because up to that point, he'd been advocating the building of the public square without recourse to religious ideas. In the early 2000s, he called for what he called a new post-secular imagination of the public square, in which, quotes, the vigorous continuation of religion in a continuously secularizing environment must be reckoned with. So I take that to mean that post-secular planning is about allowing a plurality of voices, both religious and secular, to shape policy. One obstacle we identified in our report to faith engagement was the continuation in some authorities, planning and local authorities, of what I might call a 1960s secularism, rather than a 21st century post-secularism. In other words, viewing religion as vaguely irrelevant or mainly irrelevant to the debate about planning and flourishing communities. Post-secular planning may help us avoid mistakes that perpetuate division and fragmentation. Second planning principle, which closely into post-secularism or post-secularity, is intersectional planning. Intersectional planning should be central to envisaging new town communities. Those of you who know your social theory will know that it was Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 1980s who came up with the term to identify how key parts of our identity can contribute to overlapping forms of oppression, in her case, race and gender, and the experience of Black women in relation to the public space, to public goods and services. What comes through in our research is the need to ensure that faith and belief are included in the intersectionality debate alongside race, gender, class, disability, sexuality, and all sorts of other identities. Many future citizens will have faith at the core of who they are for new towns. So when any system asks anybody to leave a vital part of their identity at the door and not to engage into the public space, we create that disengagement that will be fatal to establishing new communities. Intersectional planning at its most basic is simply a call to be authentic yourself and to respect the authenticity and celebrate the authenticity of others. Third planning idea, transformational planning. Designing spaces for encounter, ritual, and shared values that generate solidarity and well-being. as one of our roundtable participants in this report astutely observed, new towns and settlements don't have the depth of history or narrative by which to create an attachment to place. So we need to create spaces and opportunities for what she called transformational moments that transcend everyday materiality and consumerism. We suggest in our report that transformational moments come from two sources. One is relational, when we have the chance to form deep attachment to others, especially those who represent difference and different encounters. Key to this relational capital are ideas associated with service, and faith groups are usually highly effective hubs for creating these opportunities. The second meaning of transformational moments will be created by public spaces of ritual depth and beauty, where we can participate in rituals of liminality at the personal and community level, spaces of grieving, remembering and celebration. And then the final planning idea is what we call infraculture, infracultural planning. If infrastructure is the hardware of planning, then infraculture is the software. And it's a term that faith groups haven't come up with, it's come up from other sources, but it refers to, in our report, notions of hospitality, neighborliness, commons, and stewardship. Planning for infraculture should ensure community resilience and attachment to place. And faith groups alongside others are well placed to lead this task, providing trusted networks, convening power, insider knowledge, volunteer capacity, and spiritual capital. And I've got 1 minute left for my final element, partnership. The call to work in partnership with government, local authorities, planners, architects, and the whole public business and voluntary sector to convert spaces of individual living, which I think is what Milton Keynes was at the time, to places of community and commons. To be fair, there is actually an invitation from policy to faith to be part of the ongoing conversation about flourishing and sustainable new settlements. The New Towns Task Force report to government advises, for example, that plans for social infrastructure should include cultural facilities and creative and faith-based spaces to enrich communities. And that later on it says, any community engagement strategy should be developed with a range of partners, including local cultural, faith, and creative organizations. So we do have an invitation. This is why the main recommendation for this report is to establish something like a New Towns Faiths Task Force for the coming years. The current ideas are in their early development, but it will be cross-faith and could include planners, architects, social housing providers, activists, and institutional faith bodies. It will strengthen multi-faith collaboration, advise on training for planning officers, build relationships between faith communities and government, audit the planning capacities amongst faith communities, ensure evidence of good practice, recommend amendments to planning policy to recognize faith communities as stakeholders, and perhaps, and I had this conversation this morning, raise funding for experiments in faith-based living, just like those 19th century pioneering experiments. The wheel might come round full circle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. A great start to the conversation for the evening. Can I warn all panel members that when we come to the question and answer, I'm going to invite you first to ask questions of your co-panel members. So be ready when I come to that moment. But first, we're going to listen to another of our panelists. So I'm turning now to Sarah. Sarah Allen is Head of Architecture and Urban Design at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Sarah's role in government is focused on design policy and its implementation. She supports the delivery of the government's commitment to improve the design quality of homes and places by working across government departments and with external stakeholders. Sarah is an architect, urban designer, and project manager with over 25 years' experience. And we're very much looking forward to hearing from you now, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Paula. And so, so my sort of brief for just this short talk was from the perspective of planning, secular planner, albeit I'm not sure about that. But there is, without doubt, a deep relationship between people and places, and sort of three examples. One historically is the role that religious buildings played in shaping city form, and the relationship, for example, of church entrance and public spaces that surround them, creating now, even still, creating social and cultural hubs. That these cities grew very slowly over hundreds of years uh, uh, until the rapid industrial growth of the 19th century. So at the end of the 19th century, there's the concept of the garden city in UK that Chris has already talked about. And those places emphasize community well-being, creating an alternative to dehumanizing spaces of the industrial city by promoting green spaces, well laid out homes with plenty of daylight, emphasizing health and social equity. And the third example, which Chris also talked about, are the post-war new towns. So built during times of rationing, we must get to address housing shortages. And these were planned with parks and civic centres, and a further effort by government to take people out of polluted cities to places designed to express new ideas about living. However well they were realized, I think those ideas are still really important to remember, because that's, there was a strong belief that actually that move to new places would be transformational for people and bring equity to social infrastructure. And also, it's no accident that at that time, housing and health were run from the same department. And now, as government puts in place its policies and implements plans for building 1.5 million homes during this parliament, we need to address how new places and changes to existing places will support individuals and communities to flourish and build in community resilience to those places. And the Housing and Planning Minister has been really clear about what we should consider, and that he says that increasing house building rates cannot mean units at any cost. Government wants exemplary development to be the norm, not the exception, so that more communities feel the benefits of new development and welcome it. And I think supporting this ambition, we have some really strong ethical foundations. So the behaviors of built environment professionals can really make a difference. And architects and planners are, after all, as well as other professionals, custodians of public trust. Are the very way that we work is underpinned by professional codes, by membership bodies and registration bodies that require integrity, impartiality, and accountability. And for those in government, the Civil Service Code adds duties of honesty, objectivity, and serving the public interest. These frameworks remind us that there is an ethical lens to design of places rather than just technical solutions solving problems in the physical environment. And built environment professionals influence identity, belonging, and well-being. And learning from systems thinkers over the last 50 years, who looked at critical frameworks for addressing complex problems, if we are to act with ethical behavior underpinning our decisions, then these decisions in complex situations should be guided by ethical dimensions of doing good, doing what's right, and doing the right thing, thinking of outcomes and consequences, applying duties, rules, and principles, and thinking about what a virtuous actor should do. But there are tensions and challenges. The ambition is to deliver 1.5 million homes in, well, now less than 5 years, creates real pressure. Sorry to go. got some homes to build. Uh, it does create a pressure of positive placemaking outcomes and can challenge ethical intentions. So speed and cost can overshadow quality, character, and inclusivity at places. Rapid delivery often prioritizes cost efficiency and standardization, risking developments that are car-dominated, lack quality, ignore sustainability or community benefit. There's a risk of assuming what communities need, including those with faith traditions, rather than engaging them. If we get this wrong, we undermine trust and cohesion right at the start. And the key tension does lie in streamlined planning and accelerated timelines. So intentions for quality need to be borne out through robust design governance, having expert clients, public sector, community clients, as well as private sector, and design teams of a range of disciplines, implementing collaborative and participatory methods, not just talking about, using design tools such as master plans that integrate key parts of physical environment that create resilience and flourishing places, supported by standards and strong advocacy for quality as a non-negotiable outcome. So I just finally wanted to I wanted to just quickly outline some of or highlight some of the incremental steps that the team I work in, the design and placemaking team in the department, are taking or have taken. So we prepared a design and placemaking strategy. To the end of this parliament, it seeks to demand better from the planning system, support local authorities to demand better, and ensure we evaluate and celebrate delivering better. To the last point, we just commissioned the National Housing Design Quality Audit that's expected to report this time next year. It will set a benchmark for quality looking back over the last 5 years, and we hope to commission one then again in 5 years' time. So there's a continuing cycle of measuring how we improve. We want to continue to ensure design quality is prioritized in planning reforms, the National Planning Policy Framework, as well as updates to national design guidance and testing an idea from model design codes to take forward an idea of standardizing but retaining quality and removing repetition from lower down in the planning system. We've also improved our governance and oversight of our program through a design and placemaking forum and community sector forum. And these groups meet quarterly, not just about engaging design organizations who support local authorities, but we feel that it's important to listen and discuss with those who engage communities in a whole range of activities to understand how we can better engage with the issues at grassroots levels. And then just finally, as we close, just a reflection. And so as we deliver homes at scale, built environment professionals must hold fast to ethics and inclusivity. Design should reflect the diversity of our society, including faith, and strengthen community resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And Gail, what really interesting intervention into our conversation. Our final panel member is Nathan Conway. Nathan is a member of the housing project team at the Archbishop's Council, a team which worked with dioceses and parishes to deliver affordable housing on church-owned land that meets local needs. Nathan's professional background is twofold. First, in town planning consultancy, promoting both small-scale and strategic housing developments in the West Midlands. And secondly, working with parish churches in the Diocese of Worcester to conserve and enhance church buildings for community use. He currently oversees the housing project's new GIS mapping tool, which maps church land and provides valuable spatial data sets to identify and assess sites with housing potential.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to join Chris and Sarah on the panel this evening. As introduced, I started my career in town planning, working in planning consultancy before going to work for Church of England at diocese and parish level, and now with the Archbishop's Council as part of the housing project team, we seek to deliver on the recommendations of the Coming Home report. As part of this work, I've been fortunate to work with a number of churches who are navigating to varying degrees with the planning process. And I'm going to share my reflections on how faith communities can engage with planning at that local grassroots level. I think a wonderful aspect of being part of a faith community is that you share in people's stories. You walk with them and they with you through life's highs and lows, as ups and downs. You encounter the challenges that people are facing each week. As faith communities, we often are very good at living out our faith, by responding to the needs of wider community, whether that's through setting up a food bank, providing a warm space, to providing opportunities for those who are lonely to meet and connect with others, assisting with debt advice. These are just to name a few. They're all mission driven. They're all practical expressions of faith. I do work for a church in Dudley in the West Midlands, a town that has struggled for some time now with a lack of funding, a lack of resource. You find that people's stories can often be linked to the built environment in which they live. And the challenge is that they experience those that the planning process aims to play its role in addressing. To take a few examples from people whom I know from that congregation, and I know wouldn't mind me sharing their stories. Firstly, there's Amy. She is in her early 30s. She's grown up in Dudley. She works in the town. She's an active member of the church community and the wider community as well. She's always lived with her parents, but recently has moved out to live with her partner. However, a lack of affordable housing options has meant that they have ended up in a house that has severe damp and mold. This is having a big impact on their well-being, both physical and mental. And they're trying hard now to find other housing options for when their tenancy comes to an end. They don't want to move away from the town. They've set their roots in the town, but there are limited options in the locality, and as a result, they're in limbo. There's Maureen. She's the previous church warden. She's now retired and sadly widowed. When I chat to her and she tells me about her week, she often shares how she values the public park that's a short walk from her house. It provides a space for her to remain active, sit, and to enjoy nature, which she loves. And often, because she's a very sociable person, to have conversations with people who she meets. And I suspect without access to that park and its natural environment, her ability to remain active and social would be diminished quite considerably. And then finally, there's Alex, who for a little while now has been looking for a new job opportunity, something that will help him to progress with his career. Earlier this year, he came across a vacancy, which was exciting. He felt beauty suitable for it. The job was based in Birmingham. However, there is no train station in the centre of Dudley, and the town is not yet connected to the wider regional tram network. Therefore, the only option available to him would be to take 2 buses, taking over an hour, assuming they turn up on time. And the lack of transport connectivity in Dudley means that job opportunities within a reliable commute are limited. Each of these experiences and each of the stories are linked to the economic, social, and environmental pillars of sustainable development, along the core objective of planning legislation at the heart of the MBPF and central to each local plan. Each of these stories reflect an issue that planning policy aims to address, either by enhancing or protecting the built environment. Each of these stories relate to a desire for human flourishing, in other words, to live life in all its fullness, God's purpose for humanity. So this is why participating in the planning process, whether that's through the formation or the application of planning policy, can also be a practical way of expressing and living out faith in our local communities, just as church and communities already do through food bank and the other mission activities I mentioned. So how can faith communities engage with the planning process in a way that is missional and responds to the stories that they encounter, and to briefly reflect on three ways in which they can do that. Firstly is by being a facilitator of public participation. Churches have spaces that are anchored in the heart of cities, towns, and villages. These are spaces that are already used by various groups and people from the community. And churches often have established and trusted local networks and connections, and this is something that a planning department is unlikely to have. This provides excellent opportunity to use this local presence and social capital to host, promote, and encourage people to engage with the consultation process and to convene power and local stakeholders. The church doesn't need to take a side, but it can simply facilitate. It can enable others to feedback. And this can greatly assist local authorities with the drafting of local plans, design of master plans, preparation of evidence-based studies such as housing needs surveys, and developers with the design of schemes, including the preparation of their statements of community involvement. To take an example, back in Dudley, there's a Christian charity called Provision House. They played an active role in the consultation process for the formation of a master plan and the regeneration of the top of the high street. And this is where the charity at this base. They used their large building, their large community hub, to host workshops amongst business and community leaders with members of the public and to share and collect back surveys. And this feedback informed the design proposals which the council are now able to secure funding for and to put into planning policy. Secondly, churches can be an advocate. They can be a voice on behalf of a community. They're often at the forefront of serving their community, and therefore they understand the challenges that people are experiencing, what they value, what they want from their built environment. They are well placed to communicate this as part of the planning process. As a local stakeholder, churches have the opportunity to submit representations to local and neighbour plan consultations, as well as comment on planning applications, and to do so in a way that is constructive, that advocates on behalf of those whose perspective might otherwise not be captured through traditional consultation methods. I think maybe sometimes unfairly, tendency of churches can sometimes lean towards only engaging with planning when they want to comment on an application that directly impacts the setting of their church building, but this risks being seen as NIMBY only, being sort of prohibitive only. And it misses the opportunity to play a constructive role and provide meaningful feedback. Our team has worked with a London-based church whose leader has commented on a live planning application for over 200 new homes. It's a well-informed, it's a policy-based representation which, based on local knowledge of the needs of the local community, advocates for increased community facilities and public open space provision from that development. It brings a perspective to the design and planning process on behalf of others who otherwise just simply would not have engaged with that process. And thirdly, churches and faith communities, they can be a direct participant in the development process. If they're in a fortunate position whereby they have an underutilized land or a building that has development potential, and they obtain the financial means to assess its feasibility and viability, and if they can find a delivery partner, it presents an opportunity to respond as a socially driven, values-led landowner to local need. At the housing project, we are working with numerous churches who wish to respond to local housing needs, and they want to develop an underutilized asset to meet that need, whether it's a lack of affordable housing or specialist accommodation. And we encourage projects to work to the 5S values of the Coming Home report. A home should be safe, secure, sustainable, sociable, and satisfying. We encourage these values to be embedded into projects from the outset and carried throughout the development process through to delivery. The values form the basis of a project brief, the procurement of a project team, the selection of development partner and registered provider. A great example is a completed co-housing scheme in Keswick. Here, the Churches Together network carried out a consultation on local housing need, which, as a response, led to the formation of a community land trust. Alongside this, the local St. John's Church recognised that a section of its graveyard was unusable, and it made the land available to the COT. And in partnership, it delivered 11 affordable homes for young families. And 10 years later, all but 2 of the original family occupants are still living there, which is testament, I think, to the quality of the development arising from the values that were embedded into that project. As we know, there are challenges and there are barriers to engaging well and effectively with the planning process, and maybe there'll be a chance to talk through those a little bit more in a moment. But to wrap up, to not engage with development is to miss the opportunity to bring people's stories into the planning and design process. In other words, to lend weight to social value. Often these can get lost amongst the need for economic growth, to deliver our national housing targets, during our debates at examinations and planning committees around housing need methodology, and what is a deliverable housing allocation. All of these are important, but historically, when the human scale has been overlooked and participation has been limited, design and the subsequent experience of the built environment has often been poorer. The role that faith can play at the grassroots level is to facilitate community involvement, to communicate local circumstances, and to respond to local needs, embedding and promoting values that facilitate human flourishing. And importantly, ensuring that people's stories are not lost of the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. An event like this can only be the very start of a conversation. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Bishop Rob to talk about next steps. But before I do that, let me do the ending stuff. We do need to thank our fabulous panelists, but Chris, Sarah, and Nathan, thank you so much.
It has been a remarkably, I think, quite intense evening, actually, in terms of what's been shared today. One of the things that struck me when I was a vicar in Hackney was a talk that was given by another vicar called Alan Piggott. He is a statistician by background, and he was the vicar of Hackney Wick. And he was the vicar of that part of London just when the Olympics had been announced, and then leading right up to 2012. And all the house building, all the focus on infrastructure that took place. And one of the talks that he gave to us was effectively charting in his little parish in Hackney Wick waves of changing of accommodation, waves of changing housing. And he basically came to the conclusion that for the church, the most prominent issue to affect mission is housing policy. Housing policy affects mission more than anything else. And so part of my thinking now from tonight and beyond is to take that image and say, how do we take it forward? How do we listen further? How do we inform the mission of the church, which is about building God's kingdom the way God intends it to be, going with the grain in terms of housing policy now that we've just been hearing about. And I've been really heartened by this evening. And I would say a heartfelt thank you also to each of our panelists for your extraordinary insights. I've been quite struck tonight about how we've been talking about frameworks which affect people, a deep recognition that this is about the thriving of people and of communities. I've been really struck by the conversation that we've had around levels of trust and behaviours and integrity and ethical rootedness and partnerships, and about the importance of doing better. And it strikes me that all of this, it's a bit like our conversations around safeguarding, all of this actually becomes, yes, I am my sibling's keeper, to quote the question from the book of Genesis. That this becomes something for all of us to be part of, particularly in the life of the church. I've been really struck tonight by the importance of this being hands-on approach, and how certainly being part of the solution, it's the church effectively, amongst other perhaps faith groups, community groups, who can actually provide that sense of agency for the most marginalized, and not leave it to others to be able to speak into this part of the public square. I've been struck too, and this is a piece of work to think through about the complexity. We've heard about the complexity perhaps becoming even more complex in the ecosystem of planning and so on and so forth. Well, we're part of a broad church. We can do complexity. That's fine. No problem at all. And of course, I'm aware that the planning regulations are going to become more complex as local authorities change their boundaries, as devolution takes place in terms of the central nature of the way power is exercised in this country. That's also part of the government focus. So how do we manage working our way through that deep complexity which is around us? Perhaps taking on board the spirits of the civil society covenant, which the government has now been speaking about and launched. Certainly for some concrete things, if you pardon the pun, CUF is about ending poverty together. And we recognize that poverty itself is complex. In our web of poverty, we speak about a relational poverty. We speak about a poverty of identity, and also we speak about a material poverty. Housing policy affects each and every one of these. But ending poverty together means reimagining our partnerships, reimagining the way in which we dare to work together. And our mechanisms at CUF for that are our Together Network, which many of you will be aware of, and also our work around near neighbours, and our places of welcome, of which there are nearly 1,000 of them across the country, which have already been referenced in this evening's presentations. I think right at the heart of CUF's response to this is energizing and utilizing the networks which are already there to give a focus around the importance of housing and policy and preparing, but also around prayer. I think part of our work needs to be energizing us as a people of God, which is about being equipped by the Holy Spirit to create the world, to create neighborhoods, to create relationships, as indeed God intends them to be in that deeply outward focused way. And so clearly from tonight, there is some work that needs to be done in terms of the shaping of what that equipping will look like. But I've been hugely stimulated by this evening. Thank you to our panelists. I look forward to working with you closely as we move forward from here. I hope this isn't just the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a conversation. And thank you for all that you've brought. Thank you too for the questions which have arisen. And it feels tonight like an important step forward as we seek to build a fairer and more rooted in terms of integrity and trust country. Thank you.